Mr. Thompson here. We're looking at U.S. History Standard 5, investigate specific events and key ideas that brought about the adoption and implementation of the U.S. Constitution. More specifically, we're looking at Part D of that standard. Evaluate the major arguments of the Anti-Federalists and Federalists during the debate on ratification of the U.S. Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and the roles of Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. Writing the Constitution was just the first step in creating the new government. Before the Constitution could take effect, the states had to accept or ratify the document. As soon as the contents of the Constitution were published, a group of influential people spoke out against it. These people came to be known as the Anti-Federalists. Another group, known as the Federalists, promoted the ratification of the document as it had been written at the Constitutional Convention. The two groups led the debate over the ratification process, each with solid arguments to support their viewpoints. The Anti-Federalists believed that the national government created by the Constitution would be too powerful and eliminate the power of the states. This fear looks back at the threats of an absolute ruler that the Patriots fought hard to eliminate during the Revolutionary War period. Anti-Federalists also argued that the Constitution did not describe the rights guaranteed to the states and to each citizen. Patrick Henry and George Mason were prominent Anti-Federalists. The Federalists did not agree that citizens were left vulnerable by the new Constitution. Instead, Federalists argued that listing within the document specific rights guaranteed to citizens would, in effect, limit the rights of citizens to only those listed. They believed the government created by the Constitution was designed to protect citizens from the concentration and abuse of power at the federal level through the limited government structure they created at the Constitutional Convention. Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, the men credited with designing the basic foundation of the new Constitution, were leading Federalists. Each state held its own ratification convention where these arguments were debated. 9 states were needed to secure the Constitution as the new framework for the United States government. In some cases, the state conventions argued that the delegates of the Constitutional Convention overstepped their authority when they did not simply revise the Articles of Confederation. Other conventions quickly ratified the new Constitution, believing that a stronger federal government would save the nation from falling to the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. 5 states, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, and Connecticut, ratified the Constitution very quickly. Virginia and New York were really divided on whether or not to ratify the Constitution, and critical debate started. To counter the Anti-Federalist efforts, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay wrote a series of 85 articles that supported the ratification of the Constitution and explained the main purposes behind its major conditions. These articles, written by the leading Federalists under the pseudonym Publius, were known as the Federalist Papers. The essays laid out a series of reasoned arguments originally designed to persuade the people of New York that the structure of the new Constitution actually protected and strengthened the United States. The key to these arguments was the use of the Constitution itself to illustrate how the Anti-Federalists had nothing to fear. The continued debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists threatened to derail ratification of the Constitution. To overcome the Anti-Federalist argument that the Constitution failed to include a statement of state rights and individual rights, the Federalists promised to support a Bill of Rights upon ratification of the Constitution. James Madison wrote the proposed Bill of Rights that would be added to the Constitution as amendments once the Anti-Federalists supported ratification. The negotiation was successful and the ratification process was completed. The Federalist Papers, the promise of the Bill of Rights, and the efforts of the Federalists convinced a majority of the states to ratify the Constitution by 1791. That wraps up Standard 5, Part D, evaluating the major arguments of the Anti-Federalists and Federalists during the debate on the ratification of the U.S. Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and the roles of Alexander Hamilton and James Madison.